Todd Luttenegger here with Mark Ryan, managing partner of VC8A. Today I'm going to go and ask Mark, or pick his brains a little bit about the 8A myths that we need to debunk, because there's a lot of them, especially with what's going on currently in the political environment, and we'd like to get those questions kind of fixed and out there. So he's promised to answer me as forthright as possible with regard to these answers. I'm going to roll through these questions. So the first question that everybody has is the DEI initiatives. Are they dead in the federal government? And what does that mean for the 8A program?
So yeah, I get that DEI question a lot, and obviously that's administrative policy. It's not codification. It's not law. It's not the 8A program. So there really is a clear kind of fracture there. You have policy and then you have law. The 8A program is law. So meaning it's been put in place by Congress. It's not something that a president can come and get rid of, by an executive order. So even though the Trump administration has come in and changed a lot of policy about how the government's run and about DEI efforts and made all that no longer allowed, it hasn't and can't change the 8A program. The 8A program is there. It would take an act of Congress to get rid of it. That's been tried 3 times just in the last 10 years. There's no support for that. That's not going to happen. I don't see any real effect at this point of the new administration's DEI efforts on the program itself. The program's still active, healthy. The Trump administration, Sarah Loeffler specifically, has restated the 5% goal for 8A, so that's still happening. They're still certifying firms. We're still seeing lots of 8A contracts get issued. I hate to say it's status quo because it's not. By that I mean just in the government contracting in general, we're seeing a little bit of a slowdown in 25 versus what we've seen in 24, 23 prior years. But I'm not seeing that differentiated 8A over anything else.
Sure.
Federal contracting in general is down 10 or 20% this year. 8A's, my sense is that 8A is down that same amount, but I don't see it down anything different than what we're seeing just industry-wide, government-wide.
Sure. Okay. The next question I have for you is it important to get a GSA schedule with an 8A?
In most industries, it's basically a necessity. If you're in construction, GSA is not a good fit. But for all of those 8A firms that are in some sort of professional services, to give you a number, a little over 84% of the firms that are 8A certified, providing a professional service, also have a GSA schedule contract. And that's because of the massive synergy between the two. There are a lot of contracting officers that aren't going to sole source you an 8A contract if you don't have a GSA schedule. They have to justify why they're sole sourcing it. If you have a GSA schedule, it's very easy for them to justify it. If you don't, it's a lot more work. So the average 8A firm's doing a little over $6 million a year through the program. But if they also have a GSA schedule contract, you see them averaging a little over $11 million a year. So it's a huge synergy, and it really is basically a requirement for 8A firms that are in any sort of professional services or products.
Oh, okay. The next question I have is, a lot of people seem to have the understanding that going forward with a 2-year waiver is not a good idea. You should wait until your firm's very established and probably has at least $500,000 in sales before you apply for 8A, since you only get 9 years in the program. What's your thought on that?
Wow, that's a hard question to answer. There's some times when I'd say that's right, and there's some times where it's not right. And a lot of it has to do with your capabilities and your capacity. I had a client that had only been in business for 3 months. We got them 8A certified. Now, they had a tax return, so that was a requirement for a 2-year waiver, but they started in November. They did $400,000 or $500,000 in the 2 months they were open. We applied in January or February. They got certified. That company, that's been about 4 or 5 years ago. That company's now doing almost $10 million a year through the program. So they were able to use the 2-year waiver, get certified, immediately do well. They did $2 or $3 million their very first year in 8A. So there's definitely situations where I look at a company and the way they're set up and the experience and relationships and capacities of it, and a 2-year waiver is a terrific fit. A company that's barely out of the gate, has 1 employee and did $40,000 the prior year. Getting 8A, it's not the golden ticket. You have to be able to market, you have to be able to use it, and you do need to have some capacity and capabilities before you just go jumping into the certification.
Okay. My next question is, now that Caucasian women potentially can apply for 8A and service-disabled veterans can potentially apply for 8A, is that true? Can they actually get into the program now?
And Middle Eastern Americans. The short answer is yes, it's real. They're getting in, and they've always been able to get in. But with the changes to the narrative that were made in 2023 and have gone into effect in late 23 and now 24, 25, it's just easier. The narratives aren't quite as intense as they used to be. So a narrative 3 years ago would be about a 15 to 20 page document. It would have a dozen stories in it. We would have documentation to substantiate a couple of those stories. So if you went to, a gender bias, Middle Eastern American, handicapped veteran, and you said, give me 12 stories and I need letters and supporting documents on several of them, that was a little overwhelming, and there are a lot of people that weren't able to meet that standard. But now, since everybody's doing narratives and they're all the same, they're all 2 stories, that uniformity allows for the gender biased Middle Eastern Americans and handicapped Americans to have a 2-story standard.
Sure.
They need to be substantial stories, what they'll call chronic, so it's nice to have a recent story and an older story and be able to show how those stories affected your life, your advancement of your career. But in general, most people can come up with those 2 stories, and having this new narrative standard has made it easier for those 3 groups.
Okay. And just one last question I have is, a lot of times individuals think that putting the business in, let's say, their wife's name, even though they both would qualify, is a good tactic for obtaining the 8A certification. Do you agree with that, or does that give you pause?
Yeah, pause. I get a ton of phone calls, and they're all people dreaming about getting 8A, and a lot of that is explaining to people why it's not a good fit. You want everything in your application to be absolutely transparent. You want it to be what you're doing in the normal course of operating your business, regardless of 8A. That's what I want, is helping you. That's what the government's looking for. So when you're trying to manipulate something to meet the 8A eligibility, it's generally not a good idea. Taking a business and presenting it to the SBA as being run by your spouse when she's not the one running it is never a good idea. It doesn't help you get the 8A. You're going to get it either way.
Sure.
So you want to be transparent and not have to worry about any shenanigans, going forward.
Makes sense. Because I've also heard that the person that gets 8A is the person that really is going to be the person marketing the 8A.
They need to be the face of the company.
Yeah. Okay. So they can see how that would be a little bit difficult.
Not ideal.
I appreciate you going over those myths with us today, and hopefully that finds everybody well and helps you kind of in a little bit of clarification there for what's going on with the 8A program. Thanks.
Thank you.